Hey, what's up, peeps? It's Patrick Lovell, Truth Bomb riffing the con on Thursday, March 7th, 2024 at 3 p.m. my time. And it's the State of the Union and the state of the state. And I can imagine how this thing is going to play out. We've seen enough State of the Unions in the past where you can almost pretty much paint by the numbers, orchestrating this whole thing in a scripted like fashion. And considering, kind of what's front and center in terms of really everything post Super Tuesday and where we are continuing down the path of this lesser of two evils approach, President Biden is going to get up there and he's going to address probably first. I haven't seen a rundown and I don't know um, what will be the priorities, but I'm just going to make some assumptions. And I'm actually more curious than anything. I thought I'd record this just for my own instinct to see how close I get to this, but I want to do it in context to what it is that myself and my team have been trying to get your attention about in preparation for developing a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption and drown the fascism it fuels vis-a-vis what we call the Clean New Deal, and put that in context to what nobody else is talking about, nor will they be able to achieve, because that's the point of everything. But I can imagine, from the very beginning, and I'll watch MSNBC. I might flip around between MSNBC and CNN with an occasional tip the toe into Fox, depending on how heated it gets with the boisterous Republicans, as it has the last State of the Union, as I recall. But I'll watch something like Lawrence O'Donnell and Rachel Maddow and Joy Reid and Chris Hayes and Stephanie Rule and whoever else from their block that will just provide commentary as President prior to President Biden arriving, and they'll have something to say about leading Republicans, and then of course the Speaker of the House and all of the key figures, and they'll make points and speculations about things they've been covering for some time. And then President Biden will arrive, and then they'll comment about his age, his vibrancy, how he looks strong and fit and in command. And he'll make his way through the corridor, through, shaking hands and waving and, really building up his momentum. And then he'll approach the stage and he'll come back. And then, of course, the vice president will meet him, and there'll be, a great embrace or smiles abound. And then, of course, cold shoulder from the Speaker of the House, right? That's going to be fun to watch. And then Biden will launch into his speech that was scripted far in advance. And then, of course, we'll just calibrate all of the reactions and the commentary. And then, of course, the post commentary and the response by the Republicans. But starting from the top, my guess is the first thing that the Biden administration is going to want to set forth is the success of Bidenomics. And they're going to flout the strong job numbers. They're going to talk about how the stock market has reached all-time highs, and that we've bounced from what was a massive recession during COVID, during the time of Trump, and how all of these came together through not just the sort of sum total of what we call Bidenomics, but also the infrastructure project, where I'm sure initially they'll tout renewable energy programs, and of course, of a lot of budgeting that came forth for that. I believe about 1.9 trillion in the infrastructure budget that took place within the first year of the Biden administration, if I recall correctly. And then from that point forward, probably the second item on the agenda for the Democrats, I'm going to assume, is something along the lines of the all things Roe versus Wade and what the Supreme Court's decision was, returning it to the states, and all of the elements that have led to this debate over the course of the last couple of weeks, I believe in Alabama, that put a sort of hold on in vitro fertilization, which of course allows couples that have not been able to get pregnant to use science and stem cell and whatever the actual advances are that come from this sort of thing, that are in the umbrella of what the states are refusing by way of the way they're managing abortion and controlling women's bodies and choices. And that is such a huge political piece of the Democratic puzzle because they know it worked in the last midterm election. And again, they're banking on the fact that women are going to show up and vote in mass against Donald Trump and the Republicans, and for obvious reasons. And although many of them don't realize that the damage has already been done by the Supreme Court, and it's really the ownership of the Supreme Court where this retraction of Roe v. Wade occurred and has led to this debacle that's put people in that situation in dire straits. And so following that, I would think the third item on the agenda is probably going to be something along the lines of NATO. I would imagine that somebody either from Ukraine, I don't think Zelensky's in, but somebody representing NATO, where Biden can talk about the aggression of Putin and what's on the line with funding Ukraine and our sort of position in the world, our responsibility to NATO and to democracies around the world, which then, of course, would, I would think, logically lead to what might be, the crescendo, which would be all things the Biden presidency and the ramp up to the election in these final 8 months, in the contrast through through Trump, but particularly from the border. Because, of course, that's why Biden went to the border last week and actually reached out to Trump and the Republicans to pass the bill that is the most comprehensive bill that, the Senate has come up with on immigration. And obviously, it's once again, like all other things, a standstill because of just the massive tug of war that is taking place where stupidity reigns supreme and there's no continuity or any sort of agenda on behalf of the American people. It's the two writhing political parties wrestling for control for what creates the whole. And you're going to choose based on what I continue to revert to as the lesser of two evils, which is what we've been faced with for many election cycles. And really is the whole premise behind why we are pressing forward the Clean New Deal in contrast. So am I leaving anything out? So I got the border, I got the economy, I got in vitro, I got the Supreme Court touched upon Trump. I don't know if Biden's going to go on the attack on the insurrection and the revolving door or SCOTUS and its appeared appeasement, if you will, of what I call corporate theocracy, which trickles down to benefit based on the powers that be, all things Donald Trump trying to outrun or outlast any sort of DOJ hearing/trial to take him down prior to him running out the clock to win the presidency. And a lot of people obviously are concerned about that. Probably millions of people are outraged, depressed, feeling a degree of paralysis, of hopelessness, and all of those things that I guarantee you the powers that be want. And quite frankly, the powers that be that are on the side of Biden as well as Trump. Like I said yesterday in my conversation with my colleagues, that I'd highly encourage you to watch on my Truth Bomb page at Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con, which is, I think I entitled it, what do you do when evils lock down all the angles? Will you do anything necessary? And that's the idea of the Clean New Deal. So let's provide a state of the state in context to what I just laid out. I think Biden's State of the Union will set forth, right? Well, if it's Patrick Lovell up there, or if you were reading, if I was in control, let's say I could get a feed, right? And I was like some sort of like dastardly mastermind that could overcome whatever, feed to be able to put on the Chiron super down below that actually interprets what's actually going on in the world so that you would understand, the potential incredibly nuclear reaction that could occur if we got tens of millions of people to understand what is actually going on and turn their attention to what we're doing and lock arm in arm with us to create the Clean New Deal. So the first thing that I would address as it would relate to, what did I start with? I started with going back in the economy, which is really the most important aspect of everything. And it always has been. And Clinton won and rode the tidal wave on it's the economy, stupid, because it is always about how you're faring. And by the numbers, 90% of us, or probably even a greater percentage, are struggling. Many are just hanging on by their fingertips. 12%, from what my colleague Kevin had revealed to me yesterday, is that everybody, I've heard these figures for like the last 6 years, that I think probably 12% of the population doesn't have enough money in reserves to outlast or be able to respond to an emergency, and are living on credit and basically just trying to get month to month, by any means necessary. And a lot of those types of people might have several different jobs, which of course I think the jobs reports is a reflection of that. Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't have jobs, a lot of jobs that, even though there was a massive increase in wages post COVID, it didn't keep up with the rate of inflation. And so these people, particularly if they're into houses, and we know that housing costs are astronomically high, considering that who can actually afford them and who can actually come down with the down payment and who can afford the mortgages, given what I'm just saying, given how expensive the houses are. And that's quite frankly one answer that I've resolved in probably 480 truth bombs to date on my Patrick Little Truth Bombs the Con YouTube page. And so if you're interested in delving in, I mean, you don't have to go too far back, probably one or two truth bombs ago, and I address it. But I don't want to go into what I normally talk about, because I'm trying to get to what I promised my colleague Kevin, to pivot based on where I think a massive, or the majority of the population is in terms of the reality. So if you're working 3 jobs apiece and you're barely hanging on to your fingertips and you're in debt up to your eyeballs, what would help you more than anything? Well, the thing that we prescribe and that we intend to achieve with our Clean New Deal, and it's probably the first step to developing this Clean New Deal tidal wave crusade to, quite frankly, resurrect the American dream, is to be able to work with the national market mean to establish a jobs guarantee that, if you put, I think the number currently is $60,000 per year, and a jobs guarantee in the renewable energy initiative, to rebuild the paradigm of the infrastructure grid, the energy power grid of the United States, that would take all existing technology, improve it, maneuver it, and develop a complete rebuild of our entire energy infrastructure that could have the load capacity to handle all of the different myriads of renewable energy, be it solar, be it wind, be it geothermal, be it nuclear, and other elements, hydrogen, and beyond, that could replace our entire dependence on fossil fuel. And because of the nature of the magnitude of the program, would potentially create a new consumer middle class, one that we've been destroying for the past 4 decades, and one that would turn the tables on this insanity of people working in the gig economy, hanging on by their fingertips with no time to spare, no time to have a family life, no time to be available, outside of just working 24/7, to hang on by your fingertips to whatever assets that this system is hyperinflating. And that's part and parcel to the next round of problems that we would fix. But I want to stay on path with what is kind of parallel to the State of the Union address. And so Biden would then probably go into, manifesting our position on NATO and our commitment to Ukraine, and make the case because of Alexei Navalny. And I'm not sure if his wife will be in the audience tonight. I would imagine she might be, but in the absence of her, because I don't know if Putin would let her out of the country, to be quite frank with you, for a huge PR campaign during the State of the Union address. So maybe someone else who had escaped, or somebody who is actually, I don't know, connected to Ukraine in some way, that, they can, pause to, or what am I saying? Show the cameras or point the cameras to you, while Biden makes some sort of reference to the importance of being able to provide military assistance in all manner, shapes, of forms or substances to Ukraine, in all of the different ways that we can provide assistance to thwart Putin's supposed and displayed aggression, and what that mean for the broader sort of our allies in NATO and Europe, of course, right? So ultimately, the way we look at this is that considering the last 23 years, everything post 9/11, and really you can reach back further than that, the United States has been engaged with a myriad of wars. We're combatants in many theaters that ultimately began and sprang out of, I'm just going to start there, 9/11, even though we all know that probably the big one that started this sort of era was Gulf War One, when Iraq invaded Kuwait. But after 9/11, we'd have a series of wars that was calibrated by the Bush administration. Of course, the war on terror, which ultimately led to the invasion of Iraq, that used misinformation in the UN on a grand scale that claimed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which they did not, which led to a full scale of invasion of Iraq, which, of course, was not the country that attacked us. And then ultimately everything that transpired from there, which was never a sort of defined vision of what it meant to win. It was just an ongoing program. And what we can say looking back with complete clarity is that the only ones who've really won is the military industrial complex, which loots and feeds off a trough of tens of trillions of dollars a year for never ending wars that never seem to have an end because there's no objective to win. But it is a perpetuation of American empire. It is a perpetuation of the fossil fuel sort of global paradigm. And who does that serve? Does that serve 90% of the American people? No. In terms of gas prices, and also the Biden administration's sort of well-earned, I should say, initiative in renewable projects, I believe, again, going back to the infrastructure program budget, it was, I think, 1.9 trillion. And I think there's been some very impressive successes in the renewable space, but it's not a drop in the bucket compared to what actually needs to happen. And also, I would suspect that we're going to see Biden potentially speak out of both sides of his mouth and say, early when he wants to emphasize that we're going to go to renewables and we're budgeting for the transference and we're going to become a world leader in production of, solar and things of that nature. Then later on he'll slip in, oh yeah, we're the largest, fossil fuel producing nation on earth, both oil and natural gas, because of techniques in fracking. And of course, we're providing, after one of these never-ending wars, of course, it appears that American armed forces or special forces most likely blow up the Nord Stream pipeline in Germany. And of course, we have been exporting liquefied natural gas ever since, which is part and parcel to the increase of the production of fossil fuel in the United States, which of course, on par compared to the new initiatives in renewables, but yet the initiatives in increase in fossil fuel production, there's your reality, right? And so we're still completely dependent on fossil fuel, and there's a lot more, foundational sort of scenarios as it relates to the global economy and the dollar as the world's reserve currency and everything that basically props up our economy based on that. And we can't move fast enough. So what we're proposing during the Clean New Deal is we've got to create a jobs guarantee to be able to shift people out of the gig economy into a guaranteed, baseline wage based on the mean income number around the United States to recalibrate a consumer class. And so you might ask yourself, well, wait a second, wouldn't that lead to inflation? Didn't we just basically create, and I'm sure this is going to be a part of Biden's State of the Union as well, and he might even proclaim it. I'm curious, actually, if he will. Did we have a soft landing? I know that we've been talking about there being a recession, which there was, and there has been for a lot of people, but on the numbers that we depend on in terms of creating monetary and fiscal policy, that obviously all of these numbers from the CPI to the job index and so on and so forth are looking really good. But ultimately, it's all creating what many people regard as the everything bubble. And it has for a long time. And we're all waiting for the shoe to drop. And yet the powers that be continue to enable this system to keep doing what it does, quite frankly, because of everything I've been revealing to you. But again, I'm going to stay away for that for the moment, because what I'm trying to emphasize is that, where are you? I mean, could you benefit, or would you support the idea of you getting more income working one job in a line of work that actually is going to pay dividends and be incredibly important for your country? Yeah, I think that's an upside for a lot of people. Now, imagine also, given what I said earlier in the situation, which also plays into the debt cycle and where we are in the differentiations in the sort of class calibration between the 1%, the 5%, the 10%, and the rest of America, is the idea that most people are in debt up to their eyeballs and they can barely hang on. And they've been dealing, and of course, Biden's going to talk about the inflation numbers have been reduced, but most people with all of these different sort of responsibilities, and they can hardly bring in enough to keep up with their own debt service. When they see fluctuations at the grocery store and they're trying to provide for their family, it becomes incredibly intolerable. And so that's another aspect of the disconnect between those of the investment class and then the rest of the American people. And so the idea of what I'm revealing to you is that we have got to reconstitute the middle class, and that has to be the number one priority, not the sustenance of those that have already been able to, that have already gotten away with, I can assure you, more money than you can ever possibly imagine, by means that would blow your mind. And we will reveal that in due time. But that's once you get to understand that this clean new deal is to get you out of the burden that you're in the midst of. And the next phase of that, by way of Joe Biden will inevitably talk about, they got rid of student debt for, I believe, 150,000 Americans. And I don't know all the details of who qualified for that, but there's a lot more people out there that have massive student debt. And yeah, there is probably a long way to go that we could go, particularly once we understood the numbers, especially of the transference of wealth over the course of the last 4 decades, because of systems that I've revealed to you in my work, and also, on these truth bombs. But ultimately, we gotta wipe out student debt, and we've got to wipe out really debt in general. And we know that the federal government, is in up to $33 trillion in debt. I mean, I guess we just budgeted $800 billion to kind of keep the government functioning for another short period of time. Recently, like last week, as a matter of fact, and I'm sure that's going to be another high end for Biden in his State of the Union. But ultimately, the American people, coincidentally, are in $33 trillion of credit card debt that are undermining this unsustainable system that keeps hyperinflating all of the asset values. And the only one who can benefit from that are those who own the assets. And then ultimately, the inflation is still there. And apparently, if the Federal Reserve continues to potentially, or follow through with what they've projected, which is to create 4 rate cuts or 3 rate cuts in the coming year, which Wall Street is baked in. And that's the reason why the stock markets are going through the roof, to create yet more bubbles. So it's all an illusion. So the idea is you replace the illusion with a real economy for a vast majority of Americans, while actually purging their debt at the same time, because of the numbers that we're going to roll out in due time, which of course we're not going to hear in Biden's State of the Union address. And then I think finally, if there's a spot to land on in terms of the State of the Union, really it's going to be, if Biden comes out strong with guns flaring, right, that he's going to call out the Republican Party, he's going to call out Trump for being the criminal he is, and he's going to call out SCOTUS for being involved. Now, I don't know if it's going to go as far as President Obama back in, I think, 2013, 2012, maybe, after the Citizens United decision. And I recall Obama actually laying the heavy on the Supreme Court justices sitting in the front row, and they all kind of scoffed and were like, pshaw. And I remember it was John Roberts in the front row. Just imagine 10 years later, the revelations of what we've seen with Clarence Thomas and Alito and all of these things that are leading to all of these decisions, that are really mucking up, the ability to hold one guy accountable to the law, because that's the problem. And I continue to reveal to you that corruption is the point. Now, will he actually say the C word? Will he actually say the F word, which is fraud? I'm not sure, even though obviously we saw the decision with Judge Ergeron and, of course, Letitia James, the New York AG, as it related to the $450 million settlement for Trump and his fraud. So, I mean, it's on the books. I mean, we saw this, and it's one of the many convictions that Trump is in the midst of. But, will he go that far? I'm not sure. Should he? If it were me, absolutely. But I'll say this kind of in closing, right? The Clean New Deal is going to land on pretty much progressive ideology. So all of the things that Biden's going to talk about that are going to appeal to the swing the swing voters or the independent voters, or those that are definitely in a place where they can't stomach the idea of an autocracy or of an idiot or of a criminal like Trump and the fascism that is going to follow from it. That they're ideologically more bent towards the Biden camp, and obviously this is going to speak to millions of people that obviously Biden needs now more than ever, because I think he's actually hitting a lot of problems because of Gaza and many other situations, but particularly Gaza at the moment. And again, like I've said, that, as part of one of the foundational premises of the Clean New Deal is to reverse the trend of international adventurism and military budgets around the world, when we know that trillions of dollars have been looted from the Pentagon throughout all of the so-called wars on terror, with no end, with no objective, and that's got to end. It's bleeding us dry. If we could bring those resources back to the United States in an infrastructure build, and ultimately some of these other elements to reconstitute America's middle class, that would certainly benefit a majority of the American people. And that's the intent of the Clean New Deal, is to recreate a country of, by, and for the people, other than what we're in the midst of. And all of this stuff is a paradox and some sort of Greek tragedy and Shakespeare and all the rest of it, because it's all a lie. We are of, by, and for the corrupt corporations. And there's so much more, but particularly as it relates to finance. And that's really what I want to conclude with. So in addition to those elements that meet you where you are, there's no way we can achieve what we need to achieve unless we can find an independent presidential candidate that is not beholden to both parties and all of the money mechanisms that fuel them to ultimately create this dystopia that has completely betrayed the United States. And we're going to do that two ways. We're going to create a new Glass-Steagall, which is going to separate commercial banking from investment banking. We're going to hold finance to account with regulators, which are police, to make sure that the mafiocracy that has completely looted the world doesn't have complete control and puppeteers everything that we're in the midst of. And we're going to have to do that with an independent president that is not beholden to them based on the criteria of what I just laid out the Clean New Deal to be. And then ultimately, the flip side of that initiative is going to be to destroy Citizens United. We have to end legalized corruption of our political establishment, of our political process, of the entire apparatus of our government. That's what we're all dealing with, and everything else is a facade. So if someone's not talking about systemic corruption, they're not a legitimate candidate for of, for, and by the people. We are. So thanks for listening. Compare me to what President Biden's going to talk about. Kind of think and sync and maybe play this back as things are going on to see how close I got it. And if I did, and if I got it almost on par with the arc and the trajectory of what's going on, please, will you start paying attention? Will you start delving into our work, my work, at www.thecon.tv, which is the blueprint that lays it out. And then it led to a podcast I did called The New Untouchables. That is the flip side of what I wasn't able to produce because the system quashed, this scenario. And we're trying to lead a progressive movement in the vein of both trust busting and, of course, the New Deal that has to happen now to save our country. Because you don't live in a democracy. You live in a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism, believe it or not, to guarantee the mafiocracy that's now fueling fascism. And that's the state of the union. So please, people, if you and me and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in integrity, liberty, and dignity and decency and beauty and sustainability, if we come together and we merge in unity, we will defeat the misery of tyranny. And that's called the Clean New Deal. And that is our destiny. Thanks for listening. And I hope to see some comments to see whether or not I got close to this. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards. It's not rocket science, it's rocketeering. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. This is the righteous grind. I think I already said it, but I'll end up with it because it's always a positive way to go. We can do anything we want in this country. We just have to come together, and it's a crucial time. Onwards and upwards. Thanks for listening.